Hello, and thank you for your participation in this Construction Change Directive training, also called a CCD. What is a Construction Change Directive? A Construction Change Directive approves project funds due to changes in work-related issues. This video will provide step-by-step instructions for project managers on how to initiate and approve a Construction Change Directive. In the Change Management Flow Chart, the area highlighted in yellow shows you where your owner's representative will review and authorize the proposed CCD submittal. The table of contents is listed on this slide. However, you can navigate through the table of contents by selecting the bookmarks in the comment area below the video. What is a Construction Change Directive, CCD? The CCD documents and authorizes project funds from the provisional allowance for changes in work due to various issues, such as unforeseen conditions and owner-directed additions, deletions, etc. The following steps are required to process a CCD. Prepare a complete and detailed description of the task at hand. Analyze the lump sum, unit price, or the time and material to determine which process will benefit GLWA the most. Contact the contractor of the job and get a quote. Review and negotiate a quote to make sure it is beneficial to GLWA. You will then prepare a CCD and get approval before you start a task. The scope of the CCD must be related to scope of the base contract. It is recommended to only include items related to your scope of work, which will eliminate scope creep. The CCD requirements are detailed on this slide. The scope of work and reason the work is needed is required. For example, is this an owner-directed request or unforeseen condition? In addition, the unit price, time and material, or lump sum budget amount is needed. There is a funding source for this CCD. It could be a contract, account number, or a specific allowance. The initial amount of the contract, prior additions or deletions, and the amount remaining after subtracting is not to exceed value of this Construction Change Directive. The waiver language is required along with the contractor's signature and GLWA approval signatures in accordance with procurement policy, and dollar amount to be authorized by GLWA. An additional CCD is needed for a task when there is additional funding, an unused balance, or the task is no longer required. There can be more than one task in a CCD. You cannot make payment from an allowance without an executed CCD in place. When the task is completed, a final change order will show the final balance in each CCD work item and credits out all remaining amounts. This step is critical when closing out the project. The administration of a CCD can be found in Article 12 of GLWA's construction contract. In addition, our procurement policy stipulates that a CCD shall not be used to extend the substantial completion and/or final completion dates. The contract dates can only be extended by an authorized change order and approved by GLWA's Board of Directors. The following slides will refer to specific sections of the contract which pertain to contract provisions. Let's look at the following contract provisions, which are General Conditions 12.2.6. The contractor shall produce and shall cause any subcontractors to produce any and all data GLWA may reasonably request for the purpose of determining the correctness of the charges. General Conditions 12.3.1. GLWA shall, at all times, have the right to order changes in the work to be performed on the basis of 1. A lump sum proposal as provided in Section 12.3.3. 2. A unit price basis as provided in Section 12.3.4. Or 3. Actual cost of the changes, plus a fee. General Conditions 12.3.3. If any of the changed work included in the lump sum proposal is covered by unit prices, GLWA may elect to use these unit prices within the lump sum proposal. No overhead and profit may be applied to unit prices. General Conditions 12.3.5. The contractor will submit to GLWA daily time and material tickets for all changed work, including changed work performed by subcontractors. These tickets will include the identification number assigned to this work, the location and description of the changed work, the classification of labor employed, including the applicable subcontractor workers' names and social security numbers, the materials used, the equipment rented, excluding tools, and any other information ordered by the contracting officer. General Conditions 12.3.6. The term actual cost of the changes means the sum of all costs necessarily incurred and paid by the contractor in the proper performance of the changed work. All such costs shall be in amounts no higher than those prevailing in the locality of the work. The following costs shall constitute recoverable actual cost of the changes, to which the contractor is entitled when performing extra or change work. General Conditions 12.3.8. The contractor shall maintain and submit daily records of labor, material and equipment used in the changed work, which have been acknowledged thereon daily by the contracting officer. The contractor shall certify all time and records and invoices. Keep and present in such form as the contracting officer may direct itemized accounting, together with supporting data and vouchers of all actual costs associated with the extra or changed work. When utilizing the time and material method to process a CCD, the contractor is responsible for supplying daily records of all material, labor hours by trade, and equipment used on the project, and certified by GLWA site representative. Furthermore, the contractor cost proposal shall contain invoices from all supplier equipment providers listed in the CCD. Time and material billing requires the considerable effort by both the contractor and GLWA to verify that the invoices are accurate. Therefore, at a minimum the following items should be filled in. Describe the kind of work performed and where it took place. The names of the workers, their trade and position with the company, for example, John Jones, carpenter. All hours worked separated by straight time, overtime or double time. Materials used need to have descriptions and quantities listed. You need to list construction equipment that was used, the hours working, any idle time, model number and year of the equipment, and any attachments that are being billed. Contractor's signature needs to be on the time and materials sheet along with the signature of GLWA representative, after correction of sheet or annotation of any areas that were disagreed on. While reviewing the time and material sheets, pay attention that no contract work is included. For example, a section of piping was demolished and added to the time and materials sheet. However, the section of pipe was shown in the contract documents as demolished. Therefore, the time and materials sheets require careful analysis. Time and material sheets must isolate the issue being captured and shall not include the following: work that was performed to complete a base contract work, any unit price work, and correction of defective work. The owner's signature will not be an agreement to costs that are indicated on the sheet, but an agreement on quantities and hours. If there is an issue, then there needs to be a separate clarifying correspondence if needed. Supporting documentation is required for the project manager analysis and before final approval. Therefore, the contractor shall provide the following items: any invoices on materials, invoices that are for rented construction equipment, a recap sheet that summarizes and shows pricing by hours that are listed by trade position, and materials and construction equipment, an applicable collective bargaining agreement, verification of any workers' compensation rate, and justification for insurance rates. Please note, the collective bargaining agreement, the workers' compensation rate, and the insurance rate justification can only be submitted once. To document the work performed, the project manager, or the project representative, is responsible for initiating the CCD, verifying work, and gathering the documentation necessary to support approval of the CCD. In addition to the contractor keeping their daily records, the GLWA site representative should maintain the following records: what was the work performed? How many workers were on site and what materials were brought on site? Unit price quantities that were installed, and what construction equipment was on site during the work performed. This needs to be listed by manufacturer and model number. Furthermore, GLWA site representative can cross-check GLWA daily records with the contractor's daily logs to ensure the following: the work that the contractor is performing and the hours spent are accurate. The hours that are being charged have to match the actual costs. What time did they show up and if overtime and double time is needed, and paid or unpaid breaks, late starts and early quits are properly documented. Make sure that only individuals that are on site are included on the time and materials sheet. Segregate and monitor any off-site labor, for example, at contractor fab shop. Do not sign for any construction equipment that is not needed for the work that is being performed at the site. Contract compliance is essential for all parties, and the project manager should be aware of the following: costs excluded under the contract should not be signed for. For example, tools, some non-manual labor, etc. Labor allocations or percentages for cost items beyond the actual labor present on site should not be signed for. Avoid any concurrent unit price work and time and materials work by the same crew. If it is not avoidable, then careful observation must be required. Make a note of the split between the two types of work. Isolate and note the tools and equipment required for non-time and materials work. No prorating a percentage of base contract work if costs would have been otherwise incurred. For example, mobilization, demobilization. In addition, the project manager shall ensure the labor rates provided by the contractor shall be fair and reasonable, and in compliance with the contract. In general, unless the contractor employee is directly employed on the job, their costs is included in the contractor's markup. GLWA should not be billed for project managers, accountants, and other indirect office costs. General Conditions 12.3.6.1. Payroll costs for employees of the contractor directly employed in the physical performance of the work. Payroll costs shall include salaries or wages paid, plus the cost of itemized fringe benefits, Social Security contributions, unemployment, workers' compensation insurance, and vehicle parking costs. The payroll costs associated with premiums paid for performing the work after regular hours, weekends, or holidays shall be allowed only to the extent that these costs have been approved in writing by the contracting officer. For the wage rate breakdown, you need to check wages and fringe benefits against collective bargaining agreement and certified payroll. Remember that rates vary by trade, labor classification, work performed, shift, and straight time, overtime, double time. It needs to be noted that some fringe benefits are per hours worked, and some are per hour paid. Percentages for fringes, taxes, and insurance apply to taxable base wage rate, not to fringe benefits. Finally, the Federal Insurance Contributions Act, which is at 7.65% of the base wage. State Unemployment Tax Act, applicable to first $9,000 of each employee's annual wages. The rate is based on contractors' unemployment experience. The industry average is at 7.3%. Here is an example for a construction laborer. $9,000 times 7.3% divided by $51,168 annual pay equals 1.3%. The contractor's rate could be somewhat higher to the turnover that prevents workers from working a full year. A rate of 2% would not be unreasonable. Federal unemployment insurance, after credit for SUTA, 0.6% on first $7,000 of each employee's annual wages. Here is an example for a construction laborer. $7,000 times 0.6% divided by $51,168 annual pay equals 0.08%. Contractor's rate could be somewhat higher to the extent turnover prevents workers from working a full year. A rate of 0.2% would not be unreasonable. Add workers' compensation, if the contractor does not submit proof, CRS means table by trade and state. Here is a labor rate example of a collective bargaining agreement from Laborers Local Union 1191. Labor rate. This is an example of RS means. It shows trade, base rate, overhead and profit categories. Here is a labor rate example in an acceptable format, with wages items with sufficient detail for a detailed analysis. A common misconception is for overtime and double time rates to be simply multiplied by 1.5 and 2 respectively. However, did you know that the rate for overtime is significantly less than 1.5 multiplied by straight time, and the rate for double time is significantly less than 2.0 multiplied by straight time? Payroll information should be gathered on larger efforts to verify contractor assertions. GLWA can request actual payroll records to verify payment when items that are not included in labor rate that consist of small tools, PPE, overhead, and profit. Furthermore, the project manager shall verify all material quantities and supplier invoices are fair and reasonable. Material costs should be thoroughly reviewed for the following information: actual quantities that are recorded on time and material sheets, unit prices that can be supported by invoices. It need to be confirmed that the prices are reasonable. Any applicable discounts. If the contractor receives discounts, those savings should be passed on to GLWA. Freight charges and applicable sales use tax actually paid by contractor. Currently, all contractors are required to pay sales taxes. Rental equipment often represents a significant cost of our projects. Therefore, when submitting rental equipment cost, the contractor shall provide the best cost based on duration. Additionally, the project manager shall verify that the rates are within industry standards. The GLWA site representative shall document the equipment on site, whether idle or utilized, on a daily basis. The following are specific sections of the contract provisions that are found in Article 12 of GLWA's construction contract. The following slides will refer to specific sections of the contract which pertain to equipment rates, contract requirements, general conditions 12.3.6.6, construction equipment costs of the contractor's equipment or rental costs from others hourly, daily, weekly or monthly rates will be applied where appropriate. General Conditions 12.3.3. Equipment rental may be included only if the equipment will be required on the project site for a longer duration, solely because of the changed work. Include only equipment required and being actively used for the current work. Rates for equipment rented from third parties unrelated to the contractor paid at invoiced cost. If there is any contractor-owned equipment, it is paid based on Equipment Watch Blue Book rate for the make, model, and year of that piece of equipment. Only pay for the time that the equipment is needed for the time and materials work. For any sporadic work, evaluate idle equipment cost versus mobilization/demobilization cost. Unless the equipment is brought to the job and is not needed in less than 3 weeks, pay at the FHWA hourly ownership rate, that is, monthly ownership rate excluding operating costs divided by 176. If equipment is brought to the job and is not used after 3 days or less, pay at the FHWA daily ownership rate. If equipment is brought to the job and is not needed after 3 days, but before 3 weeks, pay at the FHWA weekly ownership rate. The example shown is equipment rates from the Federal Highway Administration. It is shown at daily, weekly and monthly rates. This is used for equipment that is needed on project, specifically for changed work. If equipment is already on site or will remain on site following change work, use the monthly rate. With the Federal Highway Administration equipment rates, there are several things you need to consider. Along with the addition of the ownership rate, pay the hourly operating rate for the hours that the equipment is being operated for the time and material work. The equipment should be prorated if it is used for both unit price and time and materials work. Ownership and operating costs of equipment accessories are also payable, for example, hoses for a pump. If the equipment is not being used, then it is paid out at half the FHWA ownership rate, without any operating rate. If the equipment is being used on overtime, then it is paid at half the FHWA ownership rate, plus the operating rate. Mobilization/demobilization costs are payable for equipment brought to the job, only for the time and material work. Did you know that different rules apply to custom equipment purchased specifically for the project? For example, a tunnel boring machine. The example shows the equipment rates for Federal Highway Administration. Our contract stipulates that the subcontractor shall provide the same level of cost proposal detail as is required for the prime contractor. The administration of a CCD can be found in Article 12 of GLWA's construction contract. The following slides will refer to specific sections of the contract which pertain to Subcontractor Costs contract requirements. General Conditions 12.3.6.4. Payments made by the contractor to subcontractors for work performed. All subcontractor recoverable costs shall be determined in the same manner as the contractor's recoverable costs. General Conditions 12.3.3. The subcontractors may include in their labor proposal only those workmen directly involved in the changed work. All other supervision is included in the percentages for overhead and profit allowed the subcontractors, unless 1. Additional foremen are required in connection with the changed work who were not otherwise on the project site. Subcontractors' material costs will include invoiced costs, transportation and applicable sales or use taxes. All subcontractor costs must be written out in detail for review. The subcontractors are bound to the same requirements for labor, materials and construction equipment costs that our contractors are. The contractor's subconsultants and engineers will price differently, and they will be consistent with professional services or engineering contracts. There is a 5% limit on any contractor markups on these services. The fee is embedded in the multiplier, so there will be no additional fees on multipliers. In the event of unusual circumstances, such as an emergency condition, the contractor may request reimbursement for costs not originally included in the contract scope. The following slides will refer to specific sections of the contract which pertain to other costs, contract requirements. General Conditions 12.3.6.5 Sales, consumer, use or similar taxes related to the work, and for which the contractor is liable, or are otherwise imposed by laws and regulations. General Conditions 12.3.6.7 Other supplemental costs which are substantiated by the contractor, as specifically being required for the proper execution of the extra or changed work, unless specifically prohibited by Section 12.3.7 below. The following slides will refer to specific sections of the contract which pertain to other costs, not recoverable. General Conditions 12.3.7.1 Payroll costs and other compensation of the contractor's officers, executives, principals, general managers, project managers, construction managers, engineers, architects, estimators, attorneys, auditors, accountants, purchasing or contracting agents, expediters, clerks, or any other employees or agents who are not specifically employed full-time on the work. Those employees or agents not employed full-time on the work are to be considered administrative costs which are covered by the contract price. General Conditions 12.3.7.2 Expenses of the contractor's principal and branch offices other than the contractor's office located at the project site. General Conditions 12.3.7.3 Any part of the contractor's capital expenses, including interest on the contractor's capital employed for the work and charges against the contractor for delinquent payments. General Conditions 12.3.7.5 Additional vehicle parking costs, which exceed the parking reimbursement allowable within the payroll cost, as provided in Section 12.3.6. General Conditions 12.3.7.6 Any other supplemental costs which are not substantiated by the contractor, as specifically being required for the proper execution of the extra or changed work. Some examples are permit costs and insurance. While reviewing the cost proposal, the project manager shall ensure that the markup percentage is not greater than allowed in our contract. The contract will provide the appropriate markups per General Conditions 12.3.3, and the project manager should be aware that these may vary. Therefore, while processing a CCD, a review of the relevant contract sections is required. The contractor, self-performing, subcontractor or subcontractor performing the changed work shall be permitted to include, in the estimate, not more than 15% for overhead and profit. The contractor and subcontractors of a higher tier shall be permitted to include in the estimate a handling charge of not more than 5%. Use of small tools is included in the overhead and profit. Overhead and profit, as outlined above, includes all other costs whatsoever beyond those enumerated. No overhead and profit may be applied to unit prices. No person performing any portion of the change in the work will be allowed a fee for overhead and profit on the premium time wages paid for overtime, shift time, or other similar types of work conditions, on which premium time wages may be paid. Also, the overhead and profit of the contractor, subcontractor, subcontractor, shall always be calculated on the cost of performing the work. Markups for the upper-tier contractor, subcontractor, subcontractor will not be calculated on the lower-tier subcontractor, subcontractor's markups. We all make mistakes. It is critical that all CCDs are checked for mathematical errors through each step within the process. A cross-check of all calculations will reduce the errors in the CCD process and shorten the approval time. Please review the following. Total hours from timesheets that have been authorized for each labor trade and classification. Ensure actual wage rates are multiplied by the number of hours worked for each classification and trade. Review total quantity and material item based on authorized timesheets. Remember applicable unit price times material item quantity. Sales tax and freight charges can apply. Total equipment usage hours by make model based on authorized timesheets. Review hourly ownership and maintenance cost rates for applicable equipment and multiply by hours used. Confirm crossfoot and total to total figures horizontally across columns instead of vertically. Next, reconcile with the contractor's invoice to find any discrepancies. It is required the contractor to correct all billing errors before processing payment for the same item. Unit prices defined in subcontracts will not be adjusted, equitably or otherwise. If there are any unit prices, they must be determined during the bidding process and strictly adhered to thereafter, even if the quantity is changed. In instances where new unit prices are proposed for new work in a CCD, a detailed proposal shall be submitted and negotiated. After the CCD is approved, the new unit prices may be applied for future work on this project. Our contract provides detailed instructions whenever unit prices are applied. General Conditions 12.3.4. Unit prices. Should GLWA elect to have changed work performed on a unit price basis, the contractor will submit, with reasonable promptness but in any event within the time period set forth in subparagraph 12.2.3 hereof, a written proposal itemizing the quantities of each item of changed work for which there is an applicable unit price contained in the agreement, contract documents or applicable subcontracts. The quantities must be itemized in relation to each specific item in the contract documents. The unit prices will also be applied to net increases in quantities of the same item. The unit prices will also be applied to net decreases in quantities of the same item. There shall be no adjustment, equitable or otherwise, to unit prices established in subcontracts. Unit prices, if any, shall be established through the bidding process and strictly adhered to thereafter, even if a change in quantity is made. The contract requirements of the unit price work are as follows. Unit rates must be attributed to the real amount delivered, rather than being arbitrarily changed depending on the difficulty of the work done. Each unit price, item scope of work, must be as specified in the table of unit prices. The cost is calculated by multiplying the unit price by the actual quantity performed in the unit of measure, specified in the unit price table. Consider demanding lump sum or time and materials, if unit costs for allowance work are not indicative of real cost and risk to conduct the work. A knowledge check is a way of testing you on what you learned in this presentation. The next few slides will ask you questions related to the material that was just presented to you. Ready? Let's start. Let's see what you remember about a Construction Change Directive. On this slide is a true-false question. Does a Construction Change Directive document and authorizes project funds for changes in work due to various issues, such as unforeseen conditions and owner-directed additions/deletions? Is this true or false? How would you answer this question? The answer is on the next slide. The answer is true. Did you get it right? If not, you may need to watch this presentation again. On this slide is a multiple-choice question. Which records should a GLWA site representative maintain when verifying work performed? 1. Work performed. 2. Number of workers. 3. Material brought to the site. 4. Unit price quantities installed. Or 5. All of the above? How would you answer this question? The answer is on the next slide. The answer is 5. All of the above. Did you get it right? If not, you may need to watch this presentation again. Last question. When do you perform a cross-foot and total? 1. During unit price works. 2. Checking calculations. 3. Rental equipment costs. 4. Labor costs. Or 5. Verifying work performed. How would you answer this question? The answer is on the next slide. The answer is 2. When you are checking calculations. Did you get it right? If not, you may need to watch this presentation again. Should you have any additional questions, please feel free to contact us. Ian Thompson, Owners Transformation Manager, at ownersrep@glwater.org. Thank you for participating in this presentation. Have a great day.